who are joining us for the first time, my name is Rodney Hakim. I'm the voice behind the New York Shakespeare social media feeds. And we are here on Zoom tonight with our private session, but we are all over social media. We are on Instagram, we are on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, WordPress, pretty much anywhere, YouTube, pretty much anywhere where there's social media, you have something from New York Shakespeare. And our mission is to try to bring you as much Shakespeare as we can from New York, whether that is performances in New York City, whether that is book readings in Brooklyn, whether it's a I don't know, whatever it might be, anywhere in the 5 boroughs and the outer areas, we try to capture as much of that and bring that content to you. And tonight we have the great privilege of offering for you our very first masterclass with one of my favorite people from the New York Shakespeare scene, and that is Stephen Burdman of New York Classical Theater. Stephen has been at the helm of New York Classical Theater for the past 22 years, and they have presented outdoor Shakespeare around New York in different parks around New York for those 2+ decades. Aside from the Shakespeare in the Park in the Delcourt Theater, I would imagine one of the biggest set of audiences in New York. So Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, I think in the 22 years that you have been presenting live Shakespeare in New York, you've played to what? How many? How many
definitely over 250,000 people.
Over 250,000 people. So it's certainly a sizable number of people who have seen Shakespeare via New York Classical Theater with Stephen Burdman at the helm. Stephen will be conducting this masterclass tonight, and he'll be giving us insights into the technique that their group is famous for. Stephen, I'm going to tell the people here the name of tonight's discussion topic, which is Panoramic Theater, but I'll let you expound upon it and fill in the details, and anytime you want me to jump in, you just let me know.
All right, thank you, Rodney. Thank you for having me. I want to encourage everybody to turn on their video and also to ask questions as we're going through. It's great if this would be a dialogue. I'm happy to tell you stories, but I also want to know what you're interested in, and I can help focus what I'm talking about. But I want to begin a little bit talking about Panoramic Theater. And Rodney, if you could cue up a video. Well, we've got Rodney will share a screen and we're going to watch a video. Some of you may have seen it. If you've seen New York Classical, this is our production of Measure for Measure. I think it's 4 or 5 seasons ago.
So
just give you an idea. Well, you can watch. We can watch Winter's Tale. That's fine as well.
Okay.
Tell him all in Bohemia as well.
Well said, Hermione.
To tell he longs to see his son withdrawn. So let him say so then.
Rodney, turn up the volume, would you?
The volume up. Volume is high or low?
It's too low.
It's too low. Okay. That's as high as it's going to go.
Okay. Here we go. Let's keep going. Let's keep going then.
I'll turn my own volume up. Let's do that. Let's try that. See if that helps. Okay. Here you go. Let's try this again. I'm going to go back to the beginning.
Please.
As well.
Well said, Hermione.
To tell he longs to see his son withdrawn. So let him say so then. Yet of your royal presence I'll adventure the borrow of a week. When at Bohemia you take my lord, I'll give him my commission to let him there a month. Yet good deed on you, I love thee not to jar the clock behind the lady to her lord. You'll stay?
No, madam.
Nay, but you will.
I may not, verily.
Verily, you put me off with the infirm hours. Verily, you shall not go. A lady's verily is as potent as a lord's. Force me to keep you as my prisoner or my guest. How say you, by your dread verily?
Your guest, then, madam. To be your prisoner should import offending, which is for me less easy to commit than you to punish.
Not your jailer then, but your kind hostess. Come, I'll question you of my lord's tricks and yours when you were boys. You were pretty lordings then?
We were, fair queen, 2 lads that thought there was no more behind but such a day tomorrow as today.
Was not my lord the verier wag of the two?
We were as twin lambs that would frisk in the sun and bleat the one at the other. We knew not the doctrine of ill-doing, nor dreamed that any did.
Thank you, Rodney.
Okay, let's stop the screen share. Okay.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. So this is a little introduction to panoramic theater, which is something that New York Classical has been developing for the last 22 years. It started out 22 years ago as a way of basically finding out how we can do Shakespeare in public venue without any amplification. That's really the gist of it. That's how this experiment all started. And panoramic theater is based on three major concepts. One is
before you launch into
yep.
the three main concepts of panoramic theater, I'm sure Nicholas and Suzanne from Hudson Theater know this. I don't know the rest of you how much awareness you might have, but as someone who has been out there and has done outdoor Shakespeare before, it is and no matter how good of an instrument you have, it is very, very easy to have your voice and your performance lost in an outdoor space, even if you just turn your head slightly this way. I remember doing an outdoor Shakespeare performance years ago, and I was turning this way to deliver a line, and the director kept on telling me, "I can't hear you." I said, "But you're just 5 feet away from me. How can you not hear me?" She said, "Well, you're turning your head this way, and all your sound is going that way." So it's a real art to master to have that amplification of your sound go everywhere where it needs to go with you moving around and running around the stage. I'm sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
No, that's totally fine, Rodney. So that's the principle, right? It's very hard to hear. There's a lot of atmospheric noise. Not that you can't hear sirens and traffic inside a Broadway theater, but it's a very different kind of beast. So there are three main ideas behind it. The first is script adaptation. We adapt the script to feel like it's actually happening in the venue at the exact time the audience is seeing it. That gives the idea that the audience is part of this exact same space that the performers are in, right? There's a sense of that. We do things like change time of day. We remove all sorts of architectural hints. For those who have seen our shows, there are no except for what's in the venue, we don't bring in any additional scenery. We have only a handful of props, and it feels really natural to the space, and that's the goal. And that's through, again, careful adaptation. It's done in a 2-hour period. There's a 2-hour maximum with no break for bathroom. 2 hours is just the right amount of time for most people. They could hack it for 2 hours, and they got to run to the bathroom. So, but this is done through careful pairing, careful editing. And there's also some deeper and deeper concepts about that. There's combinations of characters, there's excising characters, things like that to help make these things work. The second piece is about the blocking. Now, the blocking is very specific, and this leads to what Rodney was talking about. If you notice in that show, the little clip you saw, everyone who's speaking is completely facing forward. And what is happening is that's clearly done on purpose. It's done because the way I say is the voice is like a megaphone, right? And you got this, right? So if we can shoot 85% of the audience can get the sound at the same time, everybody's going to understand what's going on. Okay, so the goal is anybody who's speaking is always flat front, and what that means in the opposite is people can give a full back to the audience. And so I take my cues from, let's say, a party where people turn their back on people all the time. And when people talk, it's something like only 40% of the time do you actually have eye contact with somebody. In reality, when you're speaking with them, this whole notion of like looking at somebody all the time, it's kind of unnerving, right? Because really we don't. We look around, we talk, even at a party, you see the natural body language. So we're mimicking all this behavior. So it seems very, very natural to the audience, and the audience is completely unaware that what's going on with the actors physically. So the cue I use is hockey, right? I'm not a sports guy, but I know a little bit about hockey. And one of the things about hockey is you never notice, but hockey players are amazing skaters. You never notice their legs. You don't watch their legs. You watch the puck, you watch all those other things, but you never watch that these men, these large men, are amazing on ice, and they do incredible things by skating. And it's similar with us. So what we do is we talk about leg technique. And so, for example, there is no straight lines in panoramic theater. The actors almost never walk a straight line. They always walk in arcs. Okay, it's a little hard to demonstrate, which is what we do when I'm in person, and I'd be happy to show it to you, but I can't quite stand up. But we have a way of working in an arc, and an actor can actually do a complete cross stage left to stage right using an arc and what we call a banana cross. It's either an up banana or a down banana, and those allow the actor to continue to project their sound toward the audience. Now, what this does is, on the other hand, is the people who they're speaking to become incredibly valuable in this situation. They are as important as the person speaking because they are the ones giving the actor focus. The actor can't always see the person they're speaking with. What we do is we look for the reasonable doubt that someone can see them in their periphery. And that with that notion, the audience, like in a party where you don't look at people you may be talking to, believe that they can be seen, and the person, again, who's being spoken to is giving direct focus and giving support to the actor. As a result, what the actors who are in the shows often say is like, wow, I have never wanted to listen so deeply. In fact, this is really amazing. And of course, then the bond builds. Also, the bond builds with the audience because the actor is facing the audience. The audience feels a connection, okay? And it's hard. It's very hard. Many of the folks out here, I'm sure, do theater regularly, and trying to get an actor, oftentimes as a director, to stand still in one place is very challenging sometimes. And facing the audience and giving direct focus to them is extraordinarily challenging. But it's one of the facets of panoramic theater. The final facet is that we actually move around our venues. We have rather large venues for those who have been with us. 12 acres in Central Park. We have about 25 acres in the Battery, different sizes for different venues. And when possible, when it's not the pandemic right now, our show coming up is not going to be moving, but normally each scene happens, shouldn't say each scene happens, but we move about 4 or 5 times during this period. So in other words, it's very similar if you've ever been hiking or camping. Sometimes when you're walking toward your destination, you see one set of scenery. And the smart rule is every once in a while you should turn around and look what's going on behind you. Why? Because in case you have to leave quickly, you don't want it to be familiar, right? So I use that idea and that notion here. Similarly, the audience doesn't know, and when the audience does flip, it's a completely different background. It's as though the complete different change. This is also really wonderful for children, and it was not designed for kids. But to get kids up every 10 or 15 minutes and moving around is amazing. The focus of an 8 or a 10-year-old, for those who have children or have had children, and they don't have focus, but they can watch an entire show. My 10-year-old nephew, who's now 18, watched King Lear 3 times. I'm shocked. I was shocked to watch, he was mesmerized by the show. And it wasn't the blood and guts and the gore. It was he front row every time, and the kids run to be in the front row, and they have a real strong connection. So it's really interesting. But we have a question. Sorry, let me turn on my chat so I can see this. Meredith asks, I'm reading this. Sorry, Rodney, actually, can you grab that? Can you read the question, please?
I'll read it off to you. So
Thanks.
Meredith is asking, how does blocking work in a particularly intense scene with a receiver turned 3/4 upstage to allow for eye contact, or is it not so strict?
Okay, so there are multiple ways of looking at this. As an intense scene, there are different movements, and we've named all these movements. For example, in an intimidation scene where, like, Richard III is intimidating Buckingham at the end of the play, he may actually walk upstage of Buckingham. That way we have Buckingham's view toward the audience. We see what's going on in his eyes, of Buckingham's eyes, while Richard is making a banana cross upstage of him. Does that make sense? So the only time he's blocked vocally is the moment he's right behind him, exactly 180 to the audience, right? And what we do is we choreograph a pause or a breath in that spot. So it seems completely seamless to the audience. You could also do the reverse, which is a down banana, which goes like this, right? But then the actor faces out and away, right? But the joy of this is it's very similar to a close-up, right? Which is what we, in this modern audience, the modern audience that we grew up on television and film, right? We are used to the close-up. So we are able to achieve a similar close-up by keeping the actors focused down, and you can watch what's going on in their eyes. And that's really engaging. So the audience really connects very strongly with these actors. I am shocked time and time again at the end of a show, people will be like, where am I? They got lost in the venue. And I'm like, you're kind of right where you began. And I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people have asked me these questions over the years. They get so wrapped up. So we use the idea of how are we as our modern, right? I can't say early modern, today's audience looking at theater. I accept that most of our time together, our time spent is in front of a screen. We're watching things happen, right? And the close-up is one of those things that makes TV and film work really well. Another concept of panoramic theater also is related to television, and that's what's happening off the sides of the screen, okay? The basic tenet of panoramic theater itself is the more the audience's imagination is actively involved, the greater their emotional response will be to the material. I get this from basically when you're a TV, okay, let's say SVU, we're watching SVU, right? You're seeing a scene, you're seeing a car crash, you got ambulances, you've got cops, you've got police tape, and of course, then there's camera left and camera right, right? The illusion of TV works because in our mind, we have this little box, or sometimes today, big box, but it's still a box. It's much smaller than the reality. And we use our imagination to fill in what's going on otherwise. Similarly, in panoramic theater, we do that as well. Sometimes we will indicate that off there is a castle. That's where we're coming from. Well, you can't see it because I've staged it in such a way that literally you can't see it. So, but your imagination fills in the hole naturally. Does that make sense to everyone? So putting these things together is we really have a version of late 19th century staging, which is our blocking technique for panoramic theater. We have environmental theater, which is being in the same exact environment I talked about as the performance going on, right? And we have promenade theater, which is literally moving from place to place. So put all those three things together, and that's how you get panoramic theater. Now, then that's the beginning, right? So then each venue is unique. Every time we take a show to a different venue, the same show to a different venue, the show changes slightly, becomes customized to that venue. There are references, for example, in King Lear to a tree, an oak tree, right? That might change if I go to a different venue and it's a pine tree or a sycamore tree. We'll just substitute the word. So the audience will see the tree and we will actually be naming what that tree is, right? When we've done Richard III in Central Park, there is a kind of nice little building and it was like, that's the cupola. That's where the prince, or in our case, prince, but princes are being held. So the audience has a visual and they understand that, oh, that building over there, because Central Park, of course, when we're at 103, you can see outside the park, and that's where the princes are being held. So we use all these things. For example, in the Seagull, we had Trigorin actually fishing. So when he walks in after fishing, you could have watched him, some of the audience did, through the back of the scene that was happening. He was on the other side, we have a 3.5 acre lake, and he was on another cove, literally fishing. So when he came in with the fishing rod, half the audience already knew that's what he was doing. Of course, it was no hook, just a wing, right? So the way we find it, and that, so Central Park became, in this case, the estate, right, for the Seagull, or became the outside of the castle in Richard III, right? Because it's not indoors, right? When we did King Lear last time in 2009, and probably again, what I'm going to do, we're doing it this summer, is I was thinking, okay, if Lear is going to tell his people, let's imagine for a second that Lear's like, everybody come with me. And he drags them all outside. It's not the courtroom. We're not making this the courtroom. We're making it a public park. We're making it a park land that would be just outside. Now, of course, the rest of the play, fortunately, takes place in a lot of outdoor locations. So that, of course, makes it easy. But otherwise, we have to use our imagination and try to change it. For example, when Iachimo spies on Imogen in Cymbeline, right? His speeches are, and then he reports to Posthumus later, and he talks all about the hangings and the trunk and all that kind of stuff. How did we do it? I looked at it and I said, okay, well, what happens outside? When do people fall asleep? Well, they fall asleep in the park when they lay down a blanket and lay down and they fall asleep. So that's what we had Imogen do. She came out, she laid down, fell asleep, and Giacomo happened to walk in, because what is important? That he sees the mole on her breast, that he sees her bracelet. That's all that's important. The rest was just pared away, edited out, and then we had a possibility here, right? So he was able to give enough information that Posthumus got convinced, and that moves the play forward. So I'm always looking for what is the possibility, and then of course each location is different and inspiring. We had, you saw Castle Clinton in the Battery. We actually have a real live castle, and that's of course wonderful for plays that take place in court, like the opening of The Winter's Tale, right? And all of Leonti's scenes basically happen inside the castle, or just right outside the big castle doors. We have these gigantic, like 16, 17-foot doors that open up, and we found a way to make it look magically. So they open inwards, and we have interns, or crew members rather, who open the doors and kind of go behind them, so it looks like there's nobody there. So we're trying to just think about the venue and think about how can we use the venue. In Central Park, there's a lot of trees, so we can do a lot of long distance running. We could have entrances start, no joke, 30, 40 yards away. So an audience sees somebody coming in. Therefore, in Shakespeare, you don't have to announce who they are, right? There's another cut we can do from the play. Oh, here comes Buckingham. Well, we know if we've already seen Buckingham, we don't have to re-announce him, right? So that's the idea, just getting, and then the pairing again is stimulating the audience's imagination. They're filling in all the holes, right? So I'm giving, what I'm doing is giving just enough that your imagination takes over. And that's one of the things we've been working on for 22 years. What is enough? What is just enough? Does that make sense? Yeah, Rodney, go ahead. You had a question.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask you, the act of, again, having done it, it's a very challenging thing to cut Shakespeare in a way that you're preserving enough of the text to keep the continuity of the scene and keep the integrity of the characters, but stripping away just enough to get rid of the extraneous material. How much time do you spend doing that pairing, that cutting of the extraneous content?
Well, it's not every play is the same, you know, and depending upon when Shakespeare wrote it. Richard III was done very early in his career. Also was Comedy of Errors, which is almost, you know, tiny, very, very cut as it is already. Shakespeare tends to write, I would say 20% too much in a scene, typically 20 to 30% too much anyhow. For example, and again, I think I have a very savvy Shakespeare audience, you know that the metaphors are sometimes repeated 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Well, you know what? 3 times is a sequence. All you do need to give the audience is 3 examples. Okay? That makes sense, right? We also need to think about the language. What happens from panoramic theater point of view? What happens when a word means the exact opposite today? Right? Something means, or something is, the word is too confusing. Sometimes we'll do word substitution. I will always substitute, though, a word that was in Shakespeare's vocabulary. So I'll use the Shakespeare app on my iPhone, which I'm sure many of you have, and look up the glossary and make sure that that word exists in his vocabulary. Make sure the syllables match so that we don't lose the iambic pentameter. But I'm also a big believer of rules are meant to be broken, right? Iambic pentameter, okay, for example, this is my little thing. I don't like perdita. I like perdita. The only reason that people say perdita is because that's the way it scans. However, the first time I ever saw Winter's Tale was at the RSC in London, and they said perdita. And I thought, perdita is this light, beautiful character. Perdita sounds like some awful, you know, guinea fowl or something, right? You know, it sounds heavy and dull and boring. Perdita sounds full of light, and that's really who the character is, right? Perdita is that. She is that golden sunshine, that lightness that's brought into the play in Bohemia. So you can look at it, you know, from multiple ways. Meredith, just to clarify, there are no indoor scenes. For example, does Hamlet confront Gertrude literally outdoors with Polonius behind the foliage? Well, you know what? I've never done Hamlet outdoors, Meredith, so that's a good question. We actually did it at the Brookfield Place. So we had 300,000 square feet inside the entire Brookfield Place complex, and that's where we did our Hamlet. And so Polonius actually killed Hamlet in a lobby. So if you remember correctly, Claudius asks where he can find Polonius, and Hamlet responds, "You can nose him out in the lobby." That's actually Shakespeare's text. So that was really wonderful. The audience was like, "Oh my God, there was a lobby." That's where we were. So I'm always looking for the space and what is the interaction. So to me, the space, like a scenic design, is a character of our production, but also, again, the audience. I'm always thinking about the audience. What's their configuration? Where are they going to sit? How big a space do we need for them, et cetera, et cetera. This year, of course, is again with the pandemic coming up, we're thinking a lot about social distancing and stuff like that as well. And so it's a little bit different. Our King Lear this summer will be a little bit different, but we're doing a 13-person King Lear, so it's I'm very excited about that.
This year, you're going to be stationary as opposed to...
But we are, exactly. We're going to be stationary in all our venues. The Parks Department has asked for that, and that's something that we're going to comply with. And we also have to do contact tracing. There's a lot of issues that are happening, and I think we're that close to getting the equity approval. So I'm very excited. Other questions?
Anybody, any of our attendees have any questions they want to ask thus far about what we've covered in this first half hour? We're at the 1/3 mark of our master class.
No, I mean, I can keep telling stories, which is fine. Back to Meredith's question, certain spaces call to me for certain plays. For example, in 2011, I was in Battery Park rehearsing a play, and I was like watching the boats go out to Ellis Island, and I thought, and then I happened to be reading Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead, which is the preeminent World War II novel at the time. And the whole entire first section talks about the boat time the sailors were on the way to the Far East. The entire, just 150, 200 pages about their experience in the boat before the fighting began. And I thought, what was that like for Henry V's, the soldiers of Henry V crossing the English Channel in these long boats? Right, in the English Channel, notoriously till today as well, in terribly rough waters. What was that like? What was their experience? So what we did is we made a partnership with Statue Cruises through the River to River Festival, and every night Henry V, when we did it, started inside Castle Clinton. That was Henry's court. That's where we met the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then we all got on a boat. All got on a ferry boat, 500 people every night, sailed to Governor's Island, and that was France. And then I made one switch of the text, because what we all know is, where's the end of the play? The end of the play is supposed to be in France. If you switch one line, if you cut one line, I was able to bring it back to England. So we all got back on the boat, and very similar to today, where you oftentimes, if parents of older children drop their children off at college, right? That's a very modern concept. Right. So the King of France brought, what's her name? Sorry, the princess, Catherine, back to Castle Clinton. And that's where we ended the play. So it was this wonderful kind of circle notion. Of course, we had a cast of 40 on Governor's Island. This was now a long time ago, and there was nobody there. It was all our own. And we had these gigantic battles, and we had 500 people every night, because that's what the ferry boat sat.
Even if I might ask, this year you're stationary, but in previous years, how many different parks would your shows rotate through?
We do 4 to 6 parks a year, somewhere in that range. Yeah.
You have Central Park, you have Battery Park. Where else?
This year we're going to be in Metrotech Commons, which is downtown Brooklyn. We're oftentimes in Brooklyn Bridge Park. We're in Carl Schurz Park on the Upper East Side. We've been at Rockefeller Park as well. So at different times for, different reasons. And some people, we try out a few years, it works or it doesn't work, and then we move somewhere else. But Central Park and the Battery have been our mainstays since we started in the Battery right after 9/11. We actually received a grant to go down because they were concerned about the economy, and we were able to bring in tourism frankly. We were able to bring
Wow.
in the domestic tourism, not international tourism, but and you know, interstate, because the Lower Manhattan was, for all of us who were there, was a mess for quite some time. So a bit of the federal money helped us land that, and then we became friends with the National Parks Department and the NPS, National Park Service, who run Castle Clinton, because Castle Clinton actually is a national park. It's not run by New York City Parks Department. So we have to double permit. We have to permit both federally and also locally for that park. We've also been in Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Not such a great place for us to work, so we're not there any longer.
Okay. And you said you're in Metrotech, and that's in Brooklyn. And that's,
and that Metrotech is actually one of our good partners is Brookfield Properties, and Metrotech is now a Brookfield building. So we work with them, and they said, can you come out to Metrotech? And they provide all sorts of amenities to us, which is really great.
For those that don't know, Brookfield is one of the big properties in downtown in the Wall Street area.
Mm-hmm.
They have Brookfield Place down there, and that's kind of in the center of everything, right?
Yes, they also have properties Midtown, and now a large chunk in Brooklyn as well, and also
right.
Rockefeller Island, Roosevelt Island. We were on Roosevelt Island actually to do a reading a couple of years ago, right before the lockdown.
And are you going to spend the whole summer with Metrotech, or are you going to
No. We're only going to do a week in Metrotech.
So which other parks are going to be in for this?
So this summer we're going to be in Central Park. This is the other thing, is we rehearse outdoors as well. We do all the rehearsals outdoors, and we have people come watch. We oftentimes post what we're doing. We've had people come out and they're like, oh, I want to see how you do this scene. So we'll do that. And it's wonderful for the actors once they get comfortable. And once they get comfortable, they love it because they get immediate feedback, right? Our preview period is about tightening the show. It's not about making major changes, because as we all know, if anybody here has performed outside, you know, kids never lie. And if kids watch the scene and they're not moved, the actor's like, oh, I need to do something else. So they get involved. And we have people, particularly on weekends, people love just sitting around and watching us go through the things. It's terrific. So we'll be in Central Park. Then we do a 3-week run in Central Park. Then we're going to go to Metrotech for a week. Then we're going to Carl Schurz for a week, which is on the Upper East Side. That's 86th and East End, which is a whole different follow acts, which is really nice. We have a really nice connection with Ben Kalos, who is the city council member there. And then we are going to go to the Battery for 2 weeks. And we actually haven't been in the Battery in a couple of years. So this is really an exciting time, and the city's been overjoyed that we're going to be back.
And from one location to another,
Mm-hmm.
do you have to throw in a couple of additional rehearsals to adjust?
Yes, that's a very good question, Rodney. Yes, we usually throw in about 2, sometimes 1, depending upon time of, if it's raining, if it's not raining, of course, that's a big concern of ours, because we do everything outside. And it's of course very important this year that everything is completely outside for pandemic reasons and for all the unions. I should mention we're a full off-Broadway company. We're a full equity company. Our actors make weekly salary, pension, and healthcare. And our entire crew, almost our entire crew actually, in our movement toward a anti-racist theater, we have actually removed 90% of our internship program, and they're now all paid positions starting this year. So I'm pretty excited about that. So that's great. So of our 10 interns, only 2 now are interns, and the other 8 are full-time employees.
What's the total number of your staffers, Stephen?
This year will be 35 on this show, 35 or 36.
That's no small number for.
No, it's not. It's not, and that's typically how we roll. It's a little bit more this year. Equity is requiring us to have infection control specialists, I think they call them. There's some new name, and who will be mandating masks and 6 feet social distance and things like that. We're going to actually have 5 people in front of house, which is a little unusual for us, but we're excited about that opportunity.
And that's to keep track of people who have to register beforehand when they.
That's correct. Everyone needs to make reservations. We do free reservations beforehand, and one of the perks, and we started this free reservation program a few years ago, is we by 6 o'clock make the call whether or not we're going to do the show, and everybody gets an email if we're canceled, so nobody can ask to show up and find out we're not doing the play.
And that's this year primarily. It's because of the COVID regulations.
That's correct. That's correct.
You have to have contact tracing.
Right. We have to have contact tracing. So if anybody shows up who's not reserved, we need contact tracing information from them. We're also not. We've been asked to permit for only 75 people. I don't know if that's realistic, but that's much fewer than we typically do. So we're going to be really publicizing a lot of, please make your reservations. So everybody here, if you want to come out, please make your reservations.
And you can't have this year, like in previous years, people that just walk through and stumble.
Well, we can, as long as they give their information. They're welcome to sit down and come in.
Okay.
And sit at social distance. Yes, and sit at social distance.
Stephen, you have a question from Nicholas and Suzanne at Hudson Theater, and they are Hudson Warehouse, and they are asking, what were the problems or concerns in Prospect Park? Kings County Shakespeare worked there, but that was short-lived.
Yes, thank you, Nicholas, and thanks for being here. I appreciate that. Basically, the Prospect Park Alliance, who's the conservancy there, just didn't kind of want to do anything with us, and they were just not interested. Although we were bringing in, no joke, like 400 or 500 people a night, and we asked for some very basic things like some storage space, some really, really simple things that could happen, and they were not getting us permits. They got us permits after we began performing. You know, there was like a little bit like, we're running a professional shop here. Please just respond professionally. I've applied for the permits 6 months ago, and why am I getting them in the middle of the 1 week we're in Prospect Park? So after a certain point, the other issue was for us. I mean, you can probably distill from what I'm saying is our core is accessibility, and accessibility not only means that it's free and easy access, but access is specifically, is it accessible to a local public transportation? And Prospect Park is frankly not. And that was something that really kind of, I was not very happy about. The local people were a little upset, but they came to Brooklyn Bridge Park.
For those in here who are not in the New York area, Prospect Park is in Brooklyn. The others are in New York City, in Manhattan. Stephen, we've had many conversations over the past year or so for New York Shakespeare with you, and one of the things that always captivates me about your work with New York Classical Theater is not just the manner of staging of the Panoramic Theater, but the rigor with which your actors have to be prepared for it. Can you tell us about how we've talked about how the actors? I think your movement coach refers to them as actor athletes.
Yes, my casting director. Yes,
and
it's true. I mean, not only do they obviously have to have strong vocal skills, but you know, they have to be able to sometimes run in 20 or 30 yards to a scene. They have to be ready to do that. Outdoor changing, they have to be people who are okay with that. And fortunately, I have been very fortunate in my career and found we have a number of senior actors, well over 60, who have no problem with that. So they you know, it's a heft, you know, and for those of us who've worn these clothes, sometimes the clothes are heavy. You know, when we did Henry V, it was regularly over 100 degrees. They were wearing, you know, taffeta and leather and all sorts of stuff. And the gentleman who played the Archbishop of Canterbury, and that told me that he almost passed out. He did not, but he almost passed out. However, at that point, Governor's Island did not have potable water, and we would bring over about 25 gallons of water that was used every night, completely used up. So these people, you know the routine. We do design the clothes for maximum breathability, but there's also a period to be considered and what's necessary. We do things like provide really wonderful shoes, really wonderful boots primarily. We spend a lot of money on shoes. Most theaters don't spend as much money as we do. And that's very important for support and stability, particularly in wet grass area. Okay. And when is the grass too wet? For sword fighting, things like that. And that is also a wonderful investment, because then of course we can use the shoes, a pair of boots that cost $200. We could use them for, you know, 3 or 4 shows before they totally die.
We have a question from Violet Wang. Violet is asking Stephen, have you ever held auditions outdoors?
Violet, that's a fun question because we actually haven't. One of our concerns right now is I'm doing EPAs right now. Today we hit over 300 EPAs have come in, which is a little bit insane.
That's equity principal audition.
Exactly. So, and anybody's open to submitting for those. But we've never held them outdoors. We've always held them in a controlled environment. However, I do ask the actors to what I call rattle the walls. I want to make sure if they're new to me and I don't know their vocal capability, I want to make sure I can hear it and they're not shouting. That's the other thing. speaking of which, we have a full-time voice and speech coach on every single show who's there full-time. We'll do private sessions with actors and will simultaneously work with me on every show. Vocal health is supreme in New York Classical, right after physical health. And thank God, in 22 years, we've only had one case of laryngitis. I have to say, I'm very happy about that. I think our staging technique, frankly, has helped that. There's also sounds, right? There are certain sounds that carry that we have learned. And those sounds are sounds we put into the show because it may seem hard, hard consonants at the end, liquid U's, things that are very kind of somewhat nonsensical, somewhat sensical, the things that that a lot of classical theater typically uses, but things like you say cannot, not cannot. So if people are saying cannot, the audience could actually hear that from 30, 40 feet away. Cannot, they'd be like, what? So we've learned different ways to hit certain things, and certain buzzwords and things like that help. So the idea is the actors don't have to heft the language, don't have to belt the words, and as a result, the audience can get the sound from, again, 30, 40 feet away. If there's a 500-person audience, they're sometimes sitting 30 feet away from the audience.
How does the weather affect the actors' performances, Stephen?
Well, we don't perform when it's too wet. Basically, when there's any sort of liability that because for those who perform outdoors, if you don't perform outdoors, know that if you have a permit, you are liable for the audience. This audience member, if an audience member slips, falls, and breaks their leg, they cannot sue the city parks department. They have to sue the permit person. So we're very careful about that, and we've kind of figured out what's wet and what's too wet, if you will. As a result, too, is, for example, all our shoes have rubber on the bottoms. They're all rubberized, so there's not. One time we had a character in ballet slippers, and she whooped right on her butt, and that was the last time. That was 2006. Never had that happen ever again. So we spent a lot of money rubberizing boots. So all our boots have a firm grip on the bottom, because places like Central Park have a lot of rocks as well. The actors enter over rocks. The stone in the Battery is called bluestone, and it's a really interesting thing because it's not slippery. It can get wet as can be and still will not be slippery. So I'm never worried when we're down the Battery. But Central Park has a much different kind of, as a much more raked areas. As a matter of fact, Equity requires us to do a raked stage class for our actors. We have the honor of paying for a rake stage class for our actors every time we do a show in Central Park.
Why don't you define that for people who are not familiar with the rake?
So how to operate safely on a stage that's not flat.
Basically, it's like a stage that's angled.
That's correct. That's
angled
correct.
Down.
Correct. And that's what the stages were used in the 19th century. It helps in projection as well. So you have to, I want to give you ideas like thinking about, is the audience on the bottom of a hill? Is the audience on the top of a hill? Every different location is different. So the actors, in conjunction with the voice coach, have to think about how best to use their voice in a specific location. I will typically find two unique scenes that maybe, I'm giving an example, that need to happen in a certain place, and then figure out oftentimes how I get from one place to another when I know those two scenes are locked in. I knew where the heath is, for example, in Central Park, right? The first time I did Lear, that was really clear to me, this is where I want to do the heath. And then all of a sudden, it was like, okay, I've got 4 scenes. Where are they going to go? Where is Goneril's house? Where is Gloucester's house? And how are we getting to that from that location? So as a result, we actually have many areas in Central Park. Central Parks are home since 2000, and they're named for different parts of different plays. So there's Soren's Theater from the Seagull. That's in the very front, and that's something. And we use this, for our shorthand all the time. There's Olivia's Court from, of course, Twelfth Night. There's the Heath. There's Gloucester's Rock, where Gloucester was blinded. There's Upper Bohemia and Lower Bohemia. There's Sconnerell's Garden from School for Husbands. On and on and on and on. So there's different ways of, that's our little kind of fun way of operating this. The other thing we've done over the years is we've added radios. So we have cordless radios. So all the cueing is done with that. And so you know, the idea is about how do we keep it magic? How do we keep the magic alive? The audience does not see the crew at all. So there's no way that they know what's happening next. They turn around and all of a sudden they're there. There's a scene going.
That's the cueing. You mean if someone drops a line and they lose their place, someone is there with a radio to cue them in?
Oh, no. They're it's not about dropping a line. They will be cued in from that person with the radio, no matter what. So we don't have anybody to cue actors with lines. These are all pros. That's their job to learn the lines.
And what has happened? I'm sure in 22 years you had at least a couple of cases of actors flubbing a line or dropping a line or missing a cue.
You know, they're good. The people we've had, I have to say, thank God, are really wonderful and have picked up. I will tell you a pre-New York classical story, which was I did Godot, and I did it with women, three women and one man. The man played Lucky, and I think it was on the second or third performance they skipped 20 pages. So, but I've heard since then that's a very typical story with Godot, and they figured their way back, got back on track, and this, you know, nobody was any wiser because it's waiting for Godot. So, but this, you know, these are we cast people who are, you know, can figure it out. Occasionally they have to help somebody else out. Something does happen occasionally, but you know, it's nothing noticeable by the audience. But you know, some more outdoor things. We are constantly aware of our, you know, I remind the actors all the time that we're outside. Don't forget we're outside, right? So things happen. Buses, motorcycles, helicopters. So we actually have something called a helicopter cue. So if a helicopter flies overhead and is too loud to literally, you know, it's too low, right? So you literally can't. It doesn't matter how loud the actor is, they won't be heard. So what we do is, and all the actors are trained in this in advance, is the person who's speaking looks up, and then everybody else who's on stage looks up. And 9 times out of 10, the audience completely laughs because we recognize it, and then they play it like a laugh line, and the person who was speaking last repeats the last line as the sound is going away. Like airplanes at the Globe. That's exactly right. And one of the problems actually in Prospect Park is it was a runway. It was a feeder to, I think, LaGuardia, and we had a constant every 10 minutes a buzz in the same location. We were in the Great Lawn area, I think so, or something, and that was a problem. You know, we're aware roughly when buses come, for example, and you know, beep, 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 beep. So the actors will oftentimes time their breathing so they don't get distracted, that the audience doesn't get distracted by what's happening, doesn't get interrupted. But you know, it's important to recognize it, you know, and you know, occasionally we've been disturbed by a raccoon or a dog or something like that. When we had smaller audiences, we had some hecklers. I think everybody does, but the larger the audiences we've experienced, the audience very much is self-policing. It's wonderful. They're very, very committed. About half the audience we now know every night actually has been to a show before, and they will oftentimes help other people along. And they'll be like, "Oh, this way, come on, this is what you do," and they'll teach them how to do it. And after about 1 or 2 moves, everybody knows the rules of the game.
And how do you train your actors to be prepared for those kind of disturbances? The dog and
you know, honestly, it's rehearsal. They're rehearsing outside, and things like that are going to happen during rehearsal naturally. So the actors will have some experience with that, and about a third, 30 to 40% of the actors typically are artistic associates, people who are regularly involved with the company. Sometimes people who aren't artistic associates but have done 3 or 4 shows with us over the years. They kind of know technique. And what I oftentimes do kind of on a laissez-faire basis is ask people to pair up. You know, I ask everybody to identify themselves in the beginning who's worked for us before, and the newcomers can often meet somebody and then they can give them the insight. I mean, I'm a director. I was never an actor. I've always been a director. So what better than an actor to talk to an actor about, like, okay, how do you deal with this situation? You know, one fun thing that happened 2 years ago, 2 years ago, can you believe it, right? With the pandemic, our last major show was The Importance of Being Earnest, and we did Importance of Being Earnest 2 ways. Every other night, the entire cast changed role and gender. So one of the reverse nights where all the men were playing women and the women were playing men, cis men were playing we're playing women, etc., etc. A man was playing Mrs. Malaprop. Sorry, that's the Rivals. Was playing Miss Prism. Miss Prism. So at the end of the play, when she is the whole thing with the handbag and she's getting all freaked out, sure enough, the cops come. Not to us, but they came right down the road. And she went, oh, the police, right? I mean, like how wonderful, right? How wonderful that was, right? It was because the actor has been with me for like 15 years, no joke. And he just knew that that's what the response should be. And of course, the entire audience laughed. Actually, in the same productions, you're talking about like little goofs. Sure, it was also reverse night, and it's Lady Bracknell's skirt fell off, and a woman ran up from the audience and helped her with the skirt. And then Lady Bracknell, turned to the audience, goes, "That's my wife," and it was Juliet. Right? So, like, the audience is in on the joke. They want it to happen. They'll, the actors will be like, "Okay, where was I?" In case we stop, and they're like, "Oh, I know," and then they just start again, and then the spell hits again, and the magic starts happening. We had a question from Stephen about the insurance. How are we funded? Okay, we're completely funded by donations, 100%, and we do have grants, and the city has been very generous to us over the years. The Department of Cultural Affairs, because we perform in many districts, if people are aware, we get dispensation from multiple council members. Oftentimes, theaters are located only in one council member's district, so they have discretionary funding. But because we're in multiple 3 to 4 council members' districts, many times each of us will fund us as well. But that's only 15% of our budget. The majority comes from individuals.
I think, Stu, you and I were having a conversation recently, and we were talking about this actually. Mm-hmm. And you were saying something really that was stunning to me, is that not only is the majority of your budget provided by individuals, just people that are making donations to your group, but most of them are smaller donations. It's not like one person just giving you randomly, $25,000 or something. It's correct. It's small donations.
Correct. That's correct. So yeah, we have hundreds and hundreds of donors every year. We used to pass a basket at the end. We are not going to be doing that anymore after because of the pandemic. But we're going to have an e-basket this summer, and that's something that we're going to be doing moving forward. I also have an idea from a marketing perspective that passing a basket seems like busking, and we were getting average donations of like $275. And, occasionally somebody was throwing in $100 bill, but it wasn't adding up enough. So we realized that maybe we're going to get fewer donations. But, when you donate on Venmo or you donate on PayPal, people tend to give a little bit more. So I feel like it's going to make up for the difference.
We have a question from Meredith. Meredith asks, you were talking a little bit earlier about reverse gender casting. Did reverse casts boost revenue, do you think? And audience attendance?
Well, yes, and thank you, Meredith. We actually got a board member because she saw one version and then came back for the other. So we had a button that said, "I did it both ways." Right? So kind of fun, because if you came back the second night, you just said it to us, we just handed you a button. So people got really excited. Some people are very purist, and we had some people who were very, very purist and only wanted to see it traditional. We call it traditional and reverse. But many people saw it both ways. So we had a lot of people come. So in that show actually was something else we did for the first time, which is going to happen again, is we actually rented the theater. We rented the Art New York Theater upstairs, the big theater, and we had a free show in the Art New York space. So it was kind of fun. Very different crowd. We had a lot of people who can't physically see us outside, people in motility devices, people who got to use the infrared sound, the extra sound system because they had hearing issues. And that was lovely. It was great. And I should also mention real quick, because this is true, 30% of our audience actually lives at or below the New York City poverty line. And that's something that I think is really important to me and to our board of directors. We're providing off-Broadway theater to a large number of people who literally can't afford to see a movie.
That's huge, because in Shakespeare's day, that's really what the audience was. You had some members of high society, so to speak, who were in the upper levels, but the majority of the attendees were the groundlings who were down there, and they paid a shilling to get in. and they were the ones who were the rowdy and the making all the noise and having all the fun with all the slapstick humor. So you have, not that it's the same exactly the same parallel, but you have it for the people. It was Shakespeare.
Correct.
Was
and then one of the things too, back to moving toward an anti-racist theater, is theater by its definition, right? Closer seats are more expensive, cheaper seats are oftentimes further away. People are segregated by money, economics, okay? And so hence you can see people here obviously are interested in theater, but like it seems elitist. Theater as a whole seems elitist. So we've gotten rid of that by lumping everybody together. And literally, I've watched millionaires, maybe billionaires, are sitting next to people who live at below the poverty line and having interaction. Because normally when you sit in the theater seat, you talk to the people you came with. Maybe you talk to the person in the row in front of you, or maybe the row behind you, but that's about it, right? So you're talking to your economic peer, right? Here, we're having all sorts of different connections. I just learned a few years ago, there's a whole group of people who come every summer who met at one of our shows. And every year they come back together and they come in to see the play. This become this like informal social group. We have another guy, every birthday he comes. He brings his 30 or 40 friends every time he has a birthday, which is right in the middle of the summer. He comes to, so people look at this as a tradition. I've watched children start out in strollers. Now they're out of college. This is a wonderful opportunity for that. It's been great to watch these families grow up, go to high school, get married, and now we're starting to see marriage and children, 22 years later.
You have a question from Violet Wang. Violet, Violet, you're a young actor, I'm guessing. She asks, what are your thoughts about putting Shakespeare on tape for auditions or in reels in terms of acknowledging the actor's voice and speech capacity?
Violet, that's actually a really good question, and something I'm struggling with right now, particularly with these EPA auditions, these 300 that I'm in the midst of right now, and coming up on our principal casting, which begins next week. What I have requested is 3/4 shot, or excuse me, knees up, because I want to see the actor's full body. So myself and our casting liaison, and I'll explain that in a second, can see how a person is breathing and if they really know how to use their voice. It is impossible to tell if they have a strong voice from a taped audition, but we can see from their training and we can see from their body language whether or not they have the tools that'll be necessary to continue working with us. And we may call them back for a Zoom audition callback, or may not. So I will also encourage to look at the camera, and that's maybe particularly because of Panoramic Theater, where we really want to see the actor's eyes. I've watched 25 auditions today, and I will tell you, a lot of them are like talking like this. And I'm like, why? Why? There's a camera right here. You can look at me, right? It's easy. So the funny part was, during this pandemic, we actually produced 4 or 5 projects online, and many of our actors just really naturally got into it because they were used to playing forward, right? They had no problem. They didn't have this adjustment problem of like, but I need to talk to somebody and feel connected. No. They were used to like connecting with the audience. So that worked really well. Yeah, especially in the current era where things have moved into the Zoom format, and we're all, look at us right now, we're all talking on Zoom, and Zoom, it's some kind of strange middle point between traditional theatrical presentation and film and TV. That's correct. And in this format where you are looking into a camera, you should do your best to look straight into the camera and as if that's your audience. And that's not always easy though, but it's not always easy, right? Oftentimes if you've shot film and TV, you have an AD standing next to the camera who's just reading the lines like this, and you have to start crying and things like that. There's a lot of technique involved. It's very different from theater, but the people who we have regularly work with us who also do film, of course, readily adjusted to it quickly. So that touches on a question, Stephen. You're in Shakespeare, you're playing such huge emotions, such huge stakes. How do you get your actors, and I know you hire top-notch actors, but how do you coach them through those quick changes of emotion and producing tears and things that are audible for an audience that's in some cases 100 feet away from them? I'd be very honest, they're wonderful. I don't coach acting. I haven't coached acting in 20 years, and I'm very. I moved to New York specifically because I didn't want to coach acting.
From LA.
We have from Los Angeles, and these are amazing, amazing actors. I'm very, very blessed to have many of them who work for us, and I can just direct. They need to cry, they cry. They do their own dramaturgy. We don't do any table work. It's too expensive. People can't do table work anymore with 3 weeks of rehearsal, which includes tech. There's not enough time. There are not enough hours in the day to sit down and do this. The actors will come to me occasionally like, what does this line mean? It could mean this or this. You make the, I help them through the decision. We will, in the staging, make some major questions about how are we going to do X, Y, or Z for this particular production. Well, maybe we did it different last time. Let's try it this way this time. Whatever in my opinion, whatever is the best idea wins. I'm thrilled that we did a Romeo and Juliet a couple years ago. I had never done Romeo and Juliet. It was a play I never really liked. And although it seems like it's the play that everybody does, and that Midsummer Night's Dream, another play I don't like actually. But I got inspired. Shakespeare After All by Marjorie Garber is a wonderful book that she writes a chapter for every play. And I did a 2-year project because I'm kind of this way. And I read a chapter and read a play, and then I read a book, and then I read a chapter and read a play, that kind of thing. And her chapter on Romeo and Juliet was really just marvelous. But I got this idea that we would do it with 6 actors. I wanted to investigate what was it like to tour, right, outside London. How little, right? Touring was expensive. You have to have pack animals. You have to house actors. There's a lot of questions. So we did a 6-actor version of Romeo and Juliet. What a joy. What a joy. Very conceptual, right? We had one actor. So the reason I'm telling the story is that one of the actors, a brilliant gentleman named Ian Gould, helped me figure out a quick change for Lady Capulet when she was Benvolio into Lady Capulet. And it was the best thing, as far as I'm concerned, in the entire show. It was his idea behind this. So it's like, to me, the best idea wins. He knew where I was going. How are we going to deal with this? I gave him the direction. So then, then I had a group of actors around me and designers who were like, what about X, Y, or Z? It wasn't left on my shoulders completely, but they feel the involvement and wanting to make it right.
We have a couple of questions for you, Stephen.
Yeah.
One is from Christopher. Christopher, just if you unmute yourself for a second, I know you're from some kind of Shakespeare company, but what's the name of your Shakespeare company?
It's the International Shakespeare Players.
And where are you guys located, Christopher?
Well, this started this is post-COVID that this started. Online, just friends getting together, reading Shakespeare. We finished the whole canon from April to December 2020. We've now branched off into doing live reads in person.
That's great.
Since February 4th, and with the hopes of possibly producing a show in our backyard space in Midtown Manhattan in July.
Great.
Oh, so you're in the city here. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Awesome.
Stephen Christopher's asking, which Shakespeare play was the most difficult or challenging to adapt to an outdoor space?
Okay, Christopher. So here's the quick answer. Every time I think I can't do something, I figure it out. So Romeo and Juliet actually was the most recent because of the balcony, right? Now, if you know your history, there were no balconies in Elizabethan England at that time. Balcony was an Italian thing. It became known as the balcony scene later, long after Shakespeare was dead. But there's in the zeitgeist, we think of it as the balcony scene. What is a balcony? I asked myself, what is a balcony? It's a separation. It's a separation between Romeo and Juliet, an obstacle he has to overcome to get to his love. So I got the idea one day that I'm like, okay, I think I can do this. I put Juliet here. Here was the audience. Here was Romeo. He had to cross through the audience, which was essentially like by sitting bush height, right? And hide behind them and do all sorts of things. He was a wonderful interactive actor and was able to get there. Still felt dangerous, still felt difficult and challenging, but yet it worked. It also it was far enough because our audience, fortunately, was thick enough that, she could talk and not, and, think she was alone, right, in the particular space we were in Central Park, for example, or Lord knows we took that show everywhere. So there's not one, because there's always something challenging, and that also is exciting to me as an artistic director for 22 years. I try to always make sure I am challenged by at least one project every season in a serious way, and that's how I maintain. I don't want to get to be what happened to Joe Papp. So Joe Papp, if you know, was a director, right? He directed, and eventually he just became known as the producer. He stopped directing, and there are many artistic directors who have stopped directing, and because they get too busy. I'm not interested in that. I got into this business to direct plays, so I'm always keeping myself fresh, and even if I'm doing something for the third time, I want to find a different reason. But there are also plays that I'm like, you're not going to see me do an As You Like It or a Much Ado for a while. Okay, that's my last Much Ado was set in 1945. Right at the end of for the big kiss at the end, they were all in sailor suits and all that kind of stuff. We did I hired a choreographer. We did a big number at the end, a big song and dance number, very typical of 1945 dancing. So it was like something totally different to inspire me on my third Much Ado. But am I going to get back to Much Ado anytime soon? Probably not. That's the reality of it.
We have a question
plays do grow with you.
I'm sorry, it looks like Stephen's connection is frozen. While we're waiting for Stephen to come back to us.
I will say,
Stephen's cutting in and out.
Okay, sorry.
Are you with us, Stephen?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We lost it for about 15 seconds, but you're back.
Okay. Am I back? Okay. So I was going to say, living your life through these plays, your life changes. And the story I like to tell is my first Winter's Tale was in 2003. I was single, was dating somebody, but like nothing serious. The next time I did it, was it 2018, 19? My son was the same age as Mamillis. So I understood the loss of that child much better. I could help the actor who played Leontes, who had at that point, now he has a daughter, but hadn't had a child. I could help him understand. So I was a better director for that show in that instance at that time. And that's a life experience. There's nothing you can do to change that except for have life experience.
We have two questions for you, Stephen.
Yeah.
One is from Meredith. She says, at what point in the process do the actors get off book? Do they come to you off book, or do they?
No, they do not. And that's actually really important, Meredith. So I like the actors to learn their blocking with their lines, and it's very organic. Again, the techniques that we've developed, many of the actors, again, know them, right? Come to them, or they learn them as they're going. And I like to do very simple blocking, number one. Over the years, my blocking has gotten simpler and simpler. My importance of being earnest was extraordinarily complex. It was actually, someone made a comment about that, and they were like, wow, but it works for that play, right? Very kind of systematic, if you will, the play is. The blocking and the line learning work together. So what I actually tell the actors is after the first time we block it, then go ahead and get off book. So by the second time we make any tweaks, which things that work better one way or the other, and then they learn their lines. So it's very organic for them, and I find it actually works rather quickly. For those producers out there, a little cheat that I do is I double-side the scripts. Now, we are very green, New York Classical. We have a green statement on our website, and we save a lot of paper by double-siding the scripts. But that's not the only reason I do it. I also do it because it's a little bit of a pain in the ass, and the actors get off the script a little bit faster. To be very honest.
Okay, we have a question. Stephen, we have a question from Amy.
I was something about,
Amy says, hi, I'm a mom of a teenage Shakespeare nerd here, still getting up to speed on this whole world. We've seen many of your awesome productions, including the gender-swapped Ernest. Then she says, so since my daughter's favorite is Hamlet, my question is, why haven't you done Hamlet outside? And then let's see. And you also just said you didn't like Midsummer, neither does Sasha, but we did see a very fun Midsummer you did a few years back. How did you decide, and in general, which ones to do when?
Okay, thank you for asking that question. It's not really simple. It's a little about time and place. I haven't yet wanted to get back to Hamlet. I thought the last Hamlet I did was really strong. I was really pleased with it, and I met an actor who was just Hamlet. And if I meet another actor who screams Hamlet again, perhaps I'll do that again. I haven't thought about it outside yet. I've done it twice. I did it in grad school, but that was very grad schooly with a Claudius who was all of 27. And the Hamlet was the right age, but and Ophelia was the right age. But this last time, everybody was the right age. That's something else that we always do. Make sure that there's no. As Zelda Fitzchandler told me years ago, no spray paint in the hair. Right? Don't add age to anybody. Cast the right actors in the right age. My first Lear, God bless him, was 83. Lear this summer is in his mid 70s. I don't know the exact number, but he's in his mid 70s. So I'm very excited about that. Fortunately, both are. Donald, rest his soul, we lost him a few years ago. And John, both incredibly strong guys. So Hamlet, I don't know yet. I mean, honestly, I don't know yet because it just hasn't hit me yet. We did Midsummer because at that point we had an associate artistic director and that was a play he wanted to do. And I said, okay, sell me. So he figured out something that I said to him, there were certain things that I wanted him to do and he figured it out. And I was like, okay, come up with a conceptual idea that I can buy. And, and he was very inventive and he came up with something that was a lot of fun. But I insisted that the mechanicals play the fairies. That was my thing. And then we together, myself, him, and the designer figured out how the transformations worked. So that was the result of Midsummer. That was Midsummer. That was the start of Midsummer. But Ian Gould, who played Bottom in that, you've seen in, again, a number of our shows since then.
We have a couple of other questions for you, Stephen. Stephen Lampredi says, do you usually have doubling and do you choose your own? I assume that means if the actors get to choose who they double with. Is that right,
okay.
Stephen?
Okay, Stephen, go ahead. Go on mute. Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Okay, there we go.
My question is, often you have people play more than one role in the same production. Do you like to choose those yourself? Do you look for what's traditionally been done for convenience? How do you usually handle multiple roles for the same actor?
Okay, thanks, Stephen. That's a really good question. So actually, typically, I should say, pre-equity, pre-move to off-Broadway, and we're on a Lord contract. So pre that, where we had very large casts and there was no doubling. There was just no doubling. Because in general, the actors are too close to the audience and the audience knows. Now, when we double conceptually. So I do make the decision generally. Sometimes it's traditional, sometimes it's not. But that is because I want to, so then, I will, it depends, again, if I know who's playing the role ahead of time. I don't always do that. Sometimes there's one or two roles that are precast. And the plays like Hamlet or Lear, you need a Hamlet, you need a Lear. You don't walk into it without that. Or a Richard III, you don't walk into a Richard III situation where well, I know who's playing Stanley. I don't know Hastings. I don't know who's playing Richard. I'll figure it out usually ahead of time. So on our 6-person Romeo and Juliet, for example, they were presented with a cast. They were presented with a script that was fully done. We didn't have time to figure it out, unfortunately. My first 12th night years ago, there's a play I'd do again, but I've done it 3 times. I'd still do it. I love 12th night. So the first time we did it with 4 actors and they helped me figure out stuff, but now I will usually figure out stuff as well. But when we double now, again, and you'll see it this summer, it's either with Shakespeare's intention, in the case of Kent and Caius, or there is a reason, okay, I'm gonna give a little bit away. There will be a reason why Cordelia is playing the fool. So it will be Cordelia playing the fool as Cordelia. Now, the exciting part this summer is we're doing a cutting of Lear with the happy ending written by Nahum Tate in 1681. So it's about 85% Shakespeare, 15% Tate. One of the advantages of that is, of course, is Cordelia never leaves the country. She stays in country. So it explains why she can play the fool. Okay, she doesn't go to France.
Very rarely done. That non-Tate.
Yeah, the last time it was done was over 30 years ago. Equity Library Theater, for those folks who remember.
Okay, we have a question from Andrea. Andrea, this is one of my favorite questions because for me that's always one of the first questions that I ask when selecting the play is which source text do you use? Do you use the first?
I use Arden. I'm a big Arden fan. But actually, what was wonderful about the pandemic, I hate to say this, but was one of the wonderful things about it, because it gave me the time, is the Lear you're going to see was a cutting of the two existing Lears. I was able to go line by line through the two variations of King Lear and decide what I thought was the better line reading. And so it's my own conglomeration of the text.
That you mean
three Hamlets, there's two Lears, and it goes on and on and on.
So you're talking about first quarto versus
folio. That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
And again, let's remember, Shakespeare was dead when the folio was published.
There you go.
He didn't copy it at the folio.
And there was no copyright back then, so.
But I will recommend one thing that I will recommend. What's it called? It's called Shakespeare's Thesaurus. It's this wonderful book. It's a thesaurus of Shakespeare. And it's written by, hold on, Martin Spivak, Spevak. And I'm looking at my shelf. And it is, I think, the most go-to tool I use, except for maybe the Shakespeare app these days. Because it's wonderful. In case you're looking, again, one of our things to continue the illusion in this space, right? I am looking for a production with no red herrings, right? I'm looking for a production that does not pull the audience away from the story, except for the fact that they're in a public park. Otherwise, the story is completely tight, completely sound. Something in my editing, I'm looking to cut extraneous characters. I call them the Godot characters, the characters that we hear about that we never see, for example. Okay, we did with those. I know people here saw the importance of being an artist. Lady Bracknell did not have many friends. She has lots of friends we never meet, but Lady Harbury was the only one that we kept. So that's one thing we do a lot. There's a lot of oh God, Mistress Shore in Richard III is an important plot character, and we never meet Mistress Shore. Why is that? How do so I want to figure out about, I'm thinking about that. So again, I call those the Godot characters. They never show up. And are they important? Can we cut around them? Yes, you can. Shakespeare's text is very elastic. It's wonderful in that way. And then when you have folio, sometimes two folio copies and one folio copy, sometimes two quarto copies, you have extra words, you can find things. So before I made, actually just recently, I made that the fool determination, because we're going to use lines that are Tate's in combination with literally, there are generally sections of Tate inside the Shakespeare script. That's how it works when you cut them together. It seems to work best because there's certain things that Tate wrote about that Shakespeare never wrote about. For example, the love affair between Edgar and Cordelia, which actually starts at the very end of the first scene. Okay, so we see a hint of that in the very beginning. Okay, but now we're going to put a line back in that I had cut in a prior scene for Cordelia, or the actress found. I'm collaborating with the actress, had found this, which will help justify the change that will actually happen on stage. So the entire audience will know this from the get-go. The only person who will be in the dark is Lear.
That's fascinating.
But of course, that makes sense, right?
That only makes all the sense in the world. Stephen, a couple of questions. First, before we get to Amy's question, we had a question someone sent me directly. Can you spell out the name of the thesaurus and the author? In case
Shakespeare's Thesaurus. Hold on one second. Okay. In my right side, is it backwards?
No, you got it.
It's Marvin, M-A-R, sorry, not Martin, Marvin, M-A-R-V-I-N, last name Spivak, S-P-E-V-A-C-K. A Shakespeare Thesaurus is the name of the book.
Okay. And then
It's out of print, but you could find it in, I just got another, I now have 2 copies, one at the office and one at home.
I'm sure right now with in the Amazon area, you can find anything that's between Amazon
Oh,
and
I
eBay.
I use Abe's books. I use there are a lot of used sources. I try not to buy always Amazon.
Go down to the Strand, if you know all those places.
Yes.
Shakespeare and Company, all those kind of guys. Okay. Amy Harmon asks, how did you decide to do Tate's Lear? I can't wait. Is it because we're all in need of a happy ending right now?
Yes, Amy, that's a bit of truth to that. Absolutely. It's also interesting. There was a point where we were going to alternate nights to do traditional ending and Tate's ending. And perhaps had there not been a pandemic, I would have done that, but I had to, that would have added an extra week of rehearsal and made it really, really tricky. Also, we did a workshop of it last June on Zoom that was seen by like 3,500 people. It was crazy. And while doing it, actually, I ended up doing a lot more cutting. So what I said before is not 100% true. There are just sections of Tate but there are some lines that are unique. And one of the biggest things is because Cordelia doesn't go to France, there's actually a lot of references in Lear to Cordelia being in France. So it resulted in a lot more changes in the Shakespeare text, and I was concerned about the actors getting confused during the run. When they did Importance of Being Earnest, they were completely different, right? Every night. Actually, that also was a whole interesting thing. Because I had to time notes very carefully. The actors could not get notes. Because of our equity contract. We're only allowed 3 nights of notes during preview week out of 6. So we can pay for the time otherwise. So one night I said, okay, we're going to meet a little bit early rather than stay late. And I gave notes on the prior night's run, which was reverse. And then they were about to do a traditional night. I thought, okay, that they could handle this. It was the worst performance they ever did. Frankly, they needed that downtime, that sleep time to reconfigure and figure out, because not only did they each have a different take on the character, they had a partner, right? Because they were partnered up. So Algie and Cecily were always the same. Algie and Cecily swapped roles. Every time we had a blocking change, it wasn't just me and talking to one actor, it was me talking to 2. Sometimes if it was a 2-person scene, it was me talking to 4 people, collaborating with 4 people. It got very, very confusing at times. We all almost wanted to pull our hair out at one point. I was like, okay, everybody calm down. These were normally, I had a group of people, I knew most of them, who were very calm people who got very but we got through it and we figured it out and they were able to make it happen. But there is some magic that goes on in actors' heads. And I think it's in actors' hearts. It's an amazing thing, but it's got to be respected.
Okay, a couple of other questions. I think Amy also asked, what was your personal trajectory of going from being in LA to coming to New York and starting and running this wonderful operation?
Thank you, Amy. We don't have a ton of time, so I'll be kind of quick about it. I finished graduate school. I went to UC Irvine in California, in Southern California. I'm from Los Angeles originally, and then they said, oh, you should go to LA. That was the recommendation from a lot of the artistic leadership. And I went to LA and spent 3 years doing some theater in LA, but LA is really not a theater town. And
is that an oxymoron, Stephen, doing theater in LA?
There is a lot of small theater that don't make that's basically a step up from kind of hobby. You can't make a living. And frankly, I turned 31 and I was like, if I don't do this now, I'm not going to do it. And I moved to New York and I saved a bunch of money, moved to New York, and I knew if it didn't work out, I was going to go back. So that's what got here. I did a show for somebody, and the producer wasn't great to work with, and literally the entire cast surrounded me that night and said at the end, you need to start a company, and I did the next year. So that was the beginning of New York Classical. I wrote a letter to everybody I knew and everybody my mother knew, and got by now standards, a very small amount of money, and we put on Midsummer Night's Dream, a play I didn't like but I knew people would come to, right? But I did it my way. I did it in black leather and rubber, and it was very kind of S&M-y, and there was lots of singing and dancing. And cast and crew of 23, no, the cast was 23, I think. There were 23 people, including 9 singing and dancing fairies. I had this whole idea that the fairies were kids who ran away from their houses in New York and grew up in Central Park, kind of a little bit like Peter Pan. So we had the downtown fairy, we had the Upper East Side fairy. The Upper East Side fairy wore pearls. Downtown fairy smoked cigarettes. This is the days you could smoke in the park, you know, things like that. So we had it was very interesting. It was a really interesting conglomeration, and I cast a bunch of dancers. It was crazy, but you know, 1,500 people showed up, and I was like, okay, I'm onto something. And then a couple of seasons later, it was clear the audience like overnight started like doubling and tripling. So we knew we were onto something.
Amy has a follow-up question. She says, what did you study in grad school? Was it Shakespeare or just general theater?
I have an MFA in directing, and when I went to grad school, I had this idea that I'm not going to do new plays because I need to work on my directing. So I wanted to do classics because I thought, oh, this is the best way. And then I fell in love with Shakespeare. I always knew I liked Shakespeare, but like I didn't know that I could just pick up and start reading, and now I can. You know, so it's like, you know, at this point, it's like now it's like, okay, you know, I'm about to teach my son. I have a 13-year-old son. He just turned 13 at his bar mitzvah, and I'm about to teach his class. And one of the first things I realized I'm going to say to him, like, Shakespeare's hard. Shakespeare wasn't meant to be read. It's professionals who should do it, right? It's, you know, you could see it, but Shakespeare, you know, these plays weren't sold to make money. Maybe some money, but like there wasn't much of a market at that point during Shakespeare's life, during the early part of his life, for plays. Play scripts were really kind of like this weird, like when manga came out, manga, I can't pronounce how to pronounce it, you know, like when the graphic novels started coming out, at first not everybody was reading, they were like, what's that? That's what plays were like back then. You know, some people collected them, but many people were like, "Ooh, I'm not going to touch the play." Oh God, you know, because there was a religious issue. The Puritans didn't like plays, right? So there were people who collected a lot, and there were some people who like, "I'm not going to do it at all."
Yeah, it wasn't a very high class thing to be involved with. It was the trade of liars and prostitutes to some.
And they were in the same neighborhood.
They were in the same neighborhood, right? Okay, and one more question. Let's see, from I think this is from Andrea, if I remember correctly. Do you do any of your shows using OP, original pronunciation?
No, we don't. We don't. I know Ben Crystal pretty well. He's a great guy. He's a really lovely man. For those who are in the OP world, everybody knows who Ben Crystal is. And
he's the king
so
of OP, and he's based in England.
Yes, he is. He is. But you want to know something? We don't know. Come on. We don't know. Nobody really knows because nobody was alive, and there was no recordings, and there's just no way we could know. And the same way with Shakespeare, it's like, you know, what happened during the 20 years that were the lost years? We don't know. We can conjecture. We can think about. We can, you know, I'm reading this really thick Andrew Gurr book right now. If you like Shakespeare history, you know, Elizabethan theater history, Andrew Gurr is a wonderful historian who writes about the plays and players and stuff like that. It's awfully thick. But there's a lot we don't know. There still is a lot we don't know, and there's a lot we're never going to know. And those of us who are, I consider myself very lucky to be doing these works, I'm like, they're not sacrosanct. There are a lot of people who think they are. I'll be very honest, and I'm not one of those. I didn't have a mentor, but I guess Michael Langham was the guy who had the most influence on me. He's a Brit who spent most of his career in the States and Canada, and you know, he was like, just cut it, just change it. You know, we did Merchant of Venice, and it was about the conversion line at the end. And he's like, well, just cut it. And you know, it changes the audience's reflection of the play. It becomes a different play without the conversion line.
That's it. All hinges on that.
Yeah, and well, in some ways, but it's interesting. There's a reason for it. But does that translate? That's my question. Does it translate? Okay. You know, how's the modern audience see that?
We are past 10 o'clock, so we'll take one last question from Meredith, and then we'll start to wrap it up. Meredith asks, sometimes, or says, sometimes I have to remind myself of the times when I had to listen to the first 5-10 minutes of the play to, oh, and I lost my spot, I guess, to have her ears get used to the language. Are you asking Meredith if that's still something that the actors?
I think it's still the case. Sometimes I'll actually slow down the first scene by just 10%, just to give the audience time to kind of get used to the language and hear
yeah,
it.
that's what I wasn't clear, but what goes into your thought process when you're dealing with the first scene?
Well, yeah, I'll slow it down a little bit, basically. We do something, okay, so one of the other green initiatives is we don't have programs. We do all cell phone-based programs. And on the programs, we have something called If You're Just Joining Us, and I summarize the first 20 minutes of the play. So, but they only get 20 minutes. If they like somebody's running late, they can kind of get the basic plot points. This is Olivia, this is Vio, this is, Orsino, that kind of thing. So that gives them kind of like the beginning of it. Slowing it down a little bit is helpful. But, I think a lot of the same techniques, I talk about painting the picture with the words, the onomatopoeia, my favorite word, the onomatopoeia of the onomatopoetics of the language. Those are the things that we live in. When they talk about the green of the bushes are green right behind them, right? The grass, the fresh air, like all those things are very pungent and emotional right there and then. So I think it's the performance. But yeah, there are certain things that, and there's certain plays. We did The Rivals. There's an opening monologue, and you have to get every plot point in the opening monologue, or else you're totally lost. And so I spent a lot of time with the actor, just really helping him. He was a young actor, and that was his big speech. It was like helping him craft that opening monologue, so it was really just like easy, and the audience could completely digest it. And that set it off, right? So. And sometimes, inch thick, knee deep from Winter's Tale, you got to know everything that happens in that first scene. Take your time figuring it out. The look, there's so many ways that people don't think when you're directing that you can tell the story. You tell the story with there's a theory that you should be able to just listen to the play. There's a play that you should be able to close your ears and then just watch and still get the same story. I think of it in what's the oh shoot, I'm seeing that scene. What was that 60s film, Mrs. Robinson, Dustin Hoffman, yes. Graduate, thank you. So he's up on in the balcony at the end watching her get married, and he's like screaming, but he knows exactly what's going on because he's seeing it from the glass window, right? And that's how I think of directing all the time. So he's like, is there movement telling a story? That's one of the things I learned from Michael Langham, thank God, so many years ago, was the movement needs to tell the same story. There are little movements I'll do for pulling focus. How do you pull focus in this kind of large space when it's still not dark enough out to use lights and things like that? So, I mean, there are different techniques and all that, but how do you make this all make sense? So, and
we have one final, I know we're past time. We have one final question from Meredith that's echoed by Amy, and they ask, what's your response? And I think this is a nice way to wrap it up. What's your response to the claim that Shakespeare is an old dead white guy who is not relevant in an anti-racist world?
Excellent question. I just wrote a paper about it, funny enough. I said, why Shakespeare? And I wrote it for me. I didn't write it for the public. I wrote it for me. And New York Classical's done a couple of things this year. One is we've hired a literary director who is a historically underrepresented person. He's Black. We're cultivating what we're calling cognates, which are re-envisionings of the classics, modern plays that are re-envisionings of classics written before 1910. He's in charge of that. We're also hired a casting liaison, a person who has a different background to my own, to help me cast, just to say if he's seeing certain things that I'm not seeing. So a gentleman named Marcus Harvey is our casting liaison in King Lear. He's reviewing all the EPAs with me. He's going to be doing the principal casting, in addition to the casting director, who is about my age, white and Jewish, just like I am. and cisgendered and straight, and we have our perspective, but we want to bring somebody into the mix. So I think we need to recognize it, right? We need to recognize all these things and say, okay, look, they were trying to maintain the status quo. The rich people were trying to stay rich. They were suppressing the women. There's lots of anti-Semitic stuff. There's a ton of anti-Black stuff. Matt, our literary director, Matthew Chapman, he believes Othello should never be done because Othello was written by a white man, not a Black man. And Othello, in his point of view, is not written as a Black man. And I hear that, from his experience, and I recognize, and I say, okay, that makes sense. I'm also torn because there's some beautiful language in the play. It's probably the last biggie that I've not done, and I'm like, it's hard for me, but I recognize it. I recognize who came. What can we do? How do we think about things? Big thing that's happening now in the theater is conscious casting, right? I've been doing this for my entire career, it feels like, but now there's a name for it, where you're really thinking about who's playing the role and what they're bringing to the role, just by the way an actor looks or the way the actor sounds. I'm on a monthly phone call with artistic directors who do Shakespeare all across the world, and our last session was completely devoted to the actor's voice. What is the sound of Shakespeare? What is an elitist sound? What is artificial? Is liquid U artificial, or is it actually helping to convey something? Thinking about these things and talking to directors in Europe who use a multiple group of people who, number one, don't necessarily speak English. There's Shakespeare maybe in Czech or Shakespeare maybe in another language. Romanian, and the different sounds and how they combine. What if it's a mixed cast and they combine the sounds? How does this fadge? Quote 12th night, right? So it's exciting to me because I'm like, okay, I'm just going to embrace this and say, okay, I've been conscious about this all these years. I've been very conscious about my dear late friend Don Mayo was Black, and I was always conscious. He was one of the founders of our company, of New York Classical, one of our founding board members of the board and board directors. And I would talk to him constantly, like, is this offensive? Help me see what maybe am I not seeing something? And he would help me through these things, and I would think about them. What did they mean? There was an opportunity. There was one point where we did it, and As You Like It, and the Rosalind and Cecilia were Caucasian. And I met two wonderful Black actresses, one to play Phoebe and one to play Audrey. Then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, there's something wrong here. Why are the two country bumpkins Black? Am I going to then be making a statement? So I actually had to, unfortunately, choose one of them. I chose the right one. The woman who played Celia is now on Broadway in Harry Potter. And she's a fantastic actress and has a huge career. And Tiny Robinson. And Antoinette Robinson. She's wonderful. But I felt really bad not being able to do this other role because I would have been making a statement. I was aware of that at that time. So now I'm thinking even more, what is it? And now the last thing I'll say is I'm thinking a lot about policy, okay? The intention and good intention is not enough for me to cast. I want our cast and I want our crew to look like a subway in Midtown during rush hour. I want to look that different. That's what New York looks like, and New York Classical is a New York theater. So we should mirror how New York is built. We should mirror the population of New York. So that's what we're moving towards.
And Stephen, if as we're wrapping it up, if I may say, I think in one of our conversations you mentioned that you are writing a book about your work with New York Classical Theater. And
I am. It's taking me forever.
What are we looking at?
I'm finally writing all this stuff down, and I'm codifying it. So now it's actually a place where people can start reading. And I've had a few graduate students read it, and professors and stuff like that. So it's on its way. People think it's a book. So I'm like, okay, here we go. I just needed to kind of write it and I didn't know it was going to be a paper, but now it's like it's over 35 single pages, and who knows what's going to happen. But like, I've given you a little bit of kernel of all this technique.
So Stephen, for all the people who have joined us here tonight, if they want to find out more about New York Classical's upcoming season, you're doing King Lear this summer. If they want to sign up, if they want to register in advance, or if they just want to connect with you and your company, where can they visit you?
nyclassical.org. I put it in the chat very early on. nyclassical.org. Yeah.
Okay.
And please reserve. It's a free reservation, but it's Ovation, that standard thing that everybody's got their account, and just go ahead and log in. Ovation text, and that we just because otherwise we can't let you know if it's canceled, and we have a limited number, so we're requiring everybody to reserve this year.
Okay, all right. Well, listen,
and we are in public venues, but some of them are some of them are small. You want to come in Brooklyn, it's small.
Thank you everyone. Thank you all of us for joining us here tonight. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for lending us your time and your
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks to all for joining us. It was a really lively discussion, and I thank you all. I hope we can connect with you all again in the very near future. Thank you, Stephen, for lending your time and your many years of experience. And I look forward to coming and checking out King Lear from New York Classical Theater.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. And you can you can catch more of our content. Just look us up on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, anywhere it's New York Shakespeare. And we'll continue to cover Stephen's company and all the other wonderful companies. And Christopher, now that we know about you, we'll add you to the mix. All the wonderful companies that are doing work, Nicholas and Suzanne over at Hudson Warehouse, Akko with Amaratatuza, and all the wonderful things that are happening around New York. Thank you all. We have such a wonderful program tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next week when we do our return to our interview program on Instagram Live. We have wonderful guests scheduled on there. Keep your eyes on New York Shakespeare on social media for all that information. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Wonderful night.
Bye.